January 1945. Ramree Island, off the coast of Burma. The British Royal Navy had the Japanese 121st Infantry Regiment pinned. The Japanese were elite, battle-hardened, and refused to surrender. They had two choices: die in a suicidal bayonet charge against British tanks, or retreat through 10 miles of thick, black mangrove swamp to rejoin their main force. They chose the swamp. It was the last mistake most of them would ever make. The British didn't follow them in. They didn't have to. They just sat on the edge of the swamp with their searchlights listening. What followed was a night of screaming that the British soldiers would still be talking about decades later. The Japanese soldiers moved into the swamp at sunset. The mud was waist-deep. It was thick, salty, and filled with leeches and scorpions. But as the sun went down, the tide began to rise. The soldiers didn't know they had walked into the world's largest nesting ground for the saltwater crocodile, the salties. These are 20-foot-long, 2,000-pound killing machines that have survived since the time of the dinosaurs, and they hadn't eaten in months. The Japanese were trapped in the mud, their gunpowder wet, their movements slow. They were loud. They were bleeding. To a crocodile, they weren't soldiers. They were dinner. Around midnight, the swamp came alive. British soldiers stationed on the outskirts described the sound as the cacophony of hell. The splash of heavy tails hitting the water, the sound of bones snapping like dry wood, and the screams, because crocodiles don't kill you instantly. They use the death roll. They grab a limb, drag you underwater, and spin until the limb comes off. The Japanese soldiers began firing blindly into the dark water, but the crocodiles are silent hunters. They would strike, drag a man screaming from the line, and disappear. In the pitch black, the soldiers could only see the red glint of thousands of eyes reflecting in the moonlight. By the second day, the swamp was a graveyard. The salt water was thick with blood. The heat was nearly 100 degrees. The soldiers who hadn't been eaten were dying of dehydration and gangrene. A few tried to surrender to the British ships waiting at the edge of the swamp. They literally climbed out of the mud, begging the British to take them prisoner just to get away from the water. The British sailors were horrified. They saw men missing limbs, covered in bites, raving about monsters in the mud. Out of the nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers who entered that swamp, how many came out? The British captured only 20. Historians believe a few hundred might have escaped into the jungle, but the Guinness World Records listed this event as the greatest disaster suffered by humans from animals. It remains one of the most controversial and terrifying footnotes of the war. While some modern historians argue the numbers, the survivors' accounts remain consistent. They didn't lose the battle to the British Army. They lost it to a prehistoric enemy that didn't care about the rising sun or the Allied cause. 10:00, the moral of the swamp, the Battle of Ramree Island serves as a chilling reminder. In war, man is the most dangerous animal on Earth until he steps into the wrong territory. The Japanese 121st was ready to die for their emperor. They weren't ready to be hunted as prey. If you had to choose, a bayonet charge against a machine gun or a night in that swamp, which would you pick?